This happened last night, on election night, and I just left the local voting polls. The streets were mostly empty, and the usual crowd at the town hall had died down since I'd voted late. I took a deep breath, feeling good about doing my civic duty and ready to head home. As I walked, I noticed two guys hanging around by the edge of the parking lot. They looked my way, and at first I didn't think anything of it. But when I turned onto my street, I caught a glimpse of them crossing to my side of the road, still watching me. A bit of paranoia crept in, but I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was late, maybe they just happened to be walking the same way. But when I stole another glance back, they were still there, keeping the same distance. My pulse quickened. I picked up my pace, hoping to shake them off without making it obvious. I didn't want to come across as paranoid or rude, but every fiber of my being screamed that something was wrong. I could hear their footsteps echoing mine, too close for comfort. They didn't look away when I glanced back, just stared, expressionless. Finally, my house came into view. I sped up and practically sprinted up the driveway, fumbling with my keys until I finally managed to get inside and slam the door shut. I locked it immediately and double-checked the other doors and windows, pulling down the blinds just to feel secure. I stood there, catching my breath, trying to brush it off. I peered out the living room window, just enough to see the two men. They were strolling slowly down my street, but as they passed my house, one of them tilted his head, glancing right at me through the small gap in the blinds. His gaze lingered for a second, and then he looked away, continuing down the sidewalk like they hadn't just scared the hell out of me. After a few minutes, they were gone. I exhaled and laughed a little, feeling a bit silly for getting so worked up. They probably lived nearby and were just heading home. I closed the blinds fully and went about my evening, deciding to let it go. But about half an hour later, my doorbell rang. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest. It was nearly midnight. Who could possibly be at my door? I tiptoed over to the peephole, praying it was just a lost delivery driver or a neighbor. But when I looked, my stomach dropped. The same two men were standing on my porch. They weren't knocking, just standing there, waiting. One of them glanced up at the doorbell camera, his face blank, as if he knew I was watching. The other had his hands shoved into his pockets, looking relaxed, almost casual. They didn't say anything or make any gestures. They just stood there. My mind raced. Should I call the police? Tell them to leave? My phone was right in my hand, but something kept me from calling. It felt like acknowledging them would only make it worse, like they were waiting for any reaction. After what felt like an eternity, they turned and walked away, disappearing down the driveway and out of sight. I waited a good 10 minutes, not daring to move or make a sound. When I finally felt calm enough to check, they were gone, and the street was empty. I went around the house, checking the doors and windows one more time. I told myself it was over, that they'd given up and left. I even sat on the couch and turned on the TV to drown out my nerves. Then, I heard a quiet, metallic click. The back door handle. My blood ran cold. I had locked it. I was sure I had. But the sound came again, a slow, testing jiggle, like someone gently turning the knob back and forth. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might give me away. I crept toward the kitchen, holding my breath. I didn't know what I was expecting to see, but as I rounded the corner, I saw nothing. Just the dark outline of my back door, undisturbed and locked tight. I sighed, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. Then, from the living room, I heard a low, muffled laugh. It was faint, but unmistakable, as if someone was standing just on the other side of the wall, barely inches from me. I clutched my phone, feeling the weight of the silence around me. Slowly, I turned on the camera feed from my doorbell. It was empty. Every feed from every camera around my house showed nothing. I stood there, staring, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Maybe stress, maybe exhaustion. Just as I took a step back, I saw it. A face, just half of it, peering around the edge of my porch, grinning up at the camera. He walked right up to the camera in a slow, creepy motion and put his face right up to the screen. He knew I was watching him. Then he slowly started walking away down the driveway while continuing to stare at the camera until he was out of sight. Nothing happened after that, but I was terrified all night. I decided not to call the cops unless they came back, which I hope never happens,